Hello everyone, it's good to speak with you again. Yesterday was an all-day affair with the rain, and today the cold and the rain had babies. Each one unique and not alike. Not enough to build a snowman, but enough to fog the windows. Today we'll be starting where we left off last time. Towards the end of the workshop in the last episode, we decided we'd go a bit in depth into lesbianism and transsexuality. Now, upon further review, I won't be able to condense such comprehensive subjects into audio bites. These topics are full-course meals and should be treated with the delicacy of a master chef. I'd like to talk about the history, some thoughts, and maybe a bit of information that neither you nor I had known. By some regard and for some reason, lesbianism is seen by the public as different somehow from homosexuality, as if homosexuality only applied to males, therefore reinforcing the patriarchal system of male dominance, even when we are just identifying someone's sexual preferences. Somehow, when people think of the words homosexual and gay, it automatically defaults to the male experience, excluding the female's experience entirely. So much so that a new word must be coined in order to identify the female's experience in regards to sex and sexual preference. Lesbianism, like homosexuality, and to be quite frank, these things are the same thing, has existed and been around as long as sexuality has existed. Evidence of lesbianism within the ancient cultures are admittedly less prevalent than homosexuality, and that could be due to the patriarchal nature of history and literature within those time periods. In ancient Greece, there were few mentions of such. Nonetheless, there are a few references to female homosexuality in ancient Greek literature. Two poets from the Archaic period, Sappho and Alcman, have been interpreted as writing about female homosexuality desire. Alcman wrote hymns known as Parthenia, which discuss attraction between young women. Though it is ambiguous, historians have considered the attraction in question to be erotic or sexual. At roughly the same time, Sappho's poems discuss her love for both men and women. For instance, in Sappho's Ode to Aphrodite, the poet asks Aphrodite for aid in wooing another woman. It is noticeable that the fragment describes Sappho both giving to and receiving from the same partner, in contrast with the rigid, active, passive partner dichotomy observed in Greek male homosexual relationships. Only one fragment of Sappho's poetry, Sappho 94, contains a clear mention of female homosexual acts. In classical Athens, the idea of homosexual women is briefly mentioned in the speech of Aristophanes in Plato's Symposium. Later references to female homosexuality in Greek literature include an epigram by Asclepiades, which describes two women who reject Aphrodite's rules, but instead do other things which are not seemly. Dover comments on the striking hostility shown in the epigram to female homosexuality, contrasting it with Asclepiades' willingness to discuss his own homosexual desire in other works, suggesting that this is apparent male anxiety about female homosexuality in ancient Greece is the reason for our paucity in sources discussing it. In Greek mythology, the story of Callisto has been interpreted as implying that Artemis and Callisto were lovers. The myth of the Amazons has also been interpreted as referring to female homosexual activities. The Amazons, if you didn't know, were a race of female warriors in Greek mythology. They dwelt in the region of modern-day Ukraine. Two of the best-known Amazon queens were Penthesilea, who took part in the Trojan War, and her sister Hippolyta, who was the owner of a magical girdle given to her by the god of war Ares. The magical girdle was the object that Hercules had to recover to complete the fourth task given to him during the myth of the labors of Hercules. There were no men allowed to live together with the Amazons. However, in order to continue their race, once a year the Amazons would visit a nearby tribe called Garganians. After having sexual intercourse with them, the Amazons would return home. They would keep all baby girls that were born, but the male babies were either killed, sent to their fathers, or left in a forest to die of exposure to the elements. It doesn't seem like these warrior women needed anything from men but their seed. Some mythology says that Zeus created the island of the Amazons solely of women because he believed women to be better than men. Heavy beliefs coming from the king of the Olympians, I'd say. During the time of the Roman Empire and early Christianity, The apocryphal Apocalypse of Peter describes the punishment of lesbians and gay men in hell. Reading. And other men and women being cast down from a great rock fell to the bottom, and again were driven by them that were set over them, to go up upon the rock, and thence were cast down to the bottom, and had no rest from this torment. And these were they that did defile their bodies, behaving as women, and the women that were with them were they that lay with another as a man with a woman. The New Testament condemns both homosexuality and lesbianism, both equally convicted, and only speaks of them in general terms. Again, homosexuality and lesbianism is condemned in the New Testament, as well as the Old Testament in the Christian Catholic Bible. Between 1170 and 1180, Maimonides, one of the foremost rabbis in Jewish history, compiled this magnum opus, the Mishneh Torah. It is the only medieval-era work that details all of Jewish observance, and as regarding lesbianism, it states this: for women to be mesallat, which is women rubbing genitals against each other, with one another is forbidden, as this is the practice of ancient Egypt, which we warned against. Like the practice of the land of Egypt, you shall not do, Leviticus 18:3. The sages said in the Midrash of Sifra Arahe Mat 8:8-9, what did they do? A man married a man, and a woman married a woman, and a woman married two men. Even though this practice is forbidden, one is not lashed, as for a Torah prohibition, on account of it, since there is no specific prohibition against it, and there is no real intercourse. Therefore, one who does this is not forbidden to the priesthood because of harlotry, and a woman is not prohibited to her husband by this, since it is not harlotry. But it is appropriate to administer to them lashings of rebellion, those given for violation of rabbinic prohibitions, since they did something forbidden. As a man should be strict with his wife in this matter, and should prevent women known to do this from coming to her, or from her going to him. So, it seems that practicing lesbian techniques isn't strictly forbidden, so you won't get lashed for that. However, you are being lashed for doing something a man told you not to do in the eyes of Judaism, which is disgusting. And apologies if I chuckle slightly at this, but these are some of the most primitive and ridiculous writings I've read in quite some time. The Encyclopedia of Pleasure, the oldest of the erotic texts from the Arab world, contains the book Jawami al-Idahada, and excuse me if I butchered the pronunciation. And this encyclopedia, which described erotic, gay, and lesbian love, it quotes and refers to several named and unnamed poets, writers, philosophers, and physicians. One of the most famous and more frequently cited writers was Abu Nuwas. Some considered him to be the father of Arab erotic poetry. The book contains an account of a 2nd century Greek physician that was recorded by medieval Arab writers. The physician examined his daughter, who was a lesbian, and concluded that her sexuality was due to an itch between the labia majora and minora. That could be soothed only by rubbing them against another woman's labia. I'm going to let you sit with that for a moment, and hopefully you got a chuckle out of it like I did. Now, I would be curious to look further into during what time period or what crisis did the Islamic world backtrack a bit from the sexual revolution it had, as well as the other religions of the East, the Indian religions and Asian theologies. Even during the invasion of Genghis Khan, sexuality, as far as I've read, wasn't manipulated in any way. Research into this topic will probably be an entire essay in itself, so we'll save that for another workshop, but I would like to reflect on the fact that it doesn't seem until the Western world, Orthodox, Judaism, Christianity, Catholicism, pervaded actual human reason and philosophy as regards to sexuality and religion, that there was a bit of a backtrack. Now, yes, in the Quran it does mention that homosexuality is not looked upon in a positive light. However, there was a sexual revolution during that time, the Islamic Golden Age. And then the invasion of the West did so happen to change things, so there is a connection there. Now, when it comes to sexuality, it's not so black and white, nor right or left. It's a spectrum. Identical twins don't even have the same sexuality. A gay twin is more likely to have a twin who is straight. Researchers have actually found that when it comes to sexual orientation, environmental factors have more to do with your sexuality than genes do. For women, they're at least 4 times as important, actually. Environment in this case means literally everything that's not a gene. And I learned this bit from the Netflix series Sex Explained. If you've not given it a watch, I highly recommend you do. It's incredibly informative. So what can we take away from all of this information? One could say that most of the sexual practices that have been condemned and controlled have a heavy religious influence to them. A very primitive way of reasoning and understanding. Lesbianism, like any other sexual preference, has existed since sex has existed. Sex has existed for longer than religion has. Sex cannot exist without sexual orientation, regardless of the orient. Thank you for sticking around today for this workshop. Next time we'll dive into transsexuality as best as we can. I'd also like to get a guest speaker who identifies as a lesbian on, as well as a few guest speakers who identify as transsexual. I'd like to have a guest speaker on for the next few episodes, so that way we can walk a mile in their heels or boots or flats. I'd love to hear from you as well. You're welcome to reach out to me at askingtemptation@gmail.com. Questions on sex, love, intimacy, relationships. I'm here for you, and I'd love to speak with you, even if we're just talking about life. I love you. Until then.